Hello, my lovely friends, and welcome back to Secrets Behind the Stars. I hope you're comfy, your notifications are on, and your heart is ready for a story that has stirred whispers in every corner of our fandom. Today, we're diving into a tale of love that refused to be simple, a confession that didn't come cheap, and a single heartbeat that flipped the script for Caniozge. Yes, you read that right, becoming Caniozge, the final confession, and the instant that shifted everything. Brace yourselves, because we're about to walk through the tension, the tenderness, and that breathless moment when everything either breaks or falls perfectly into place. And before we begin, if you haven't subscribed to Secrets Behind the Stars, this is your gentle nudge to tap that button and ring the bell so you never miss a story that makes you feel this much. So where do we start with this couple whose chemistry lit up screens and set conversations on fire? Think of Barış and Elçin Sangu, two names that carry their own gravity. When fans talk about intense looks that say too much, pauses that crackle with meaning, private battles fought behind elegant smiles, and a love that seemed unbreakable yet sometimes buckled under the weight of pressure and pride, you know exactly who they mean. For many, their dynamic echoes the arc we've analyzed for ages, Caniozge and Caniozge. Those names have become shorthand for glances that linger, for quiet storms, for that stubborn silence that both protects and wounds. We've walked beside them from the very start, through early sparks, through near misses, through choices that felt brave and others that felt like running. But today, we zero in on the confession that ended the limbo, and the singular flicker of time that became their pivot point, the one you can't rewind from, the one that changes the taste of every memory. You remember the nights we were sure they'd turn away. The moments when doubt wrapped around Caniozge like a winter wind, or when Serkan wore that cool armor, pretending the cold didn't bite, even as it seeped into his bones. The cameras caught polished moments, but the silences spoke louder. And in the spaces between interviews and events, their names, Barış and Elçin, were carried around like small prayers. Communication, that fragile thread that can weave two people together or cut them apart, was their paradox. They could say everything without words and still miss what mattered most. We felt it. They did too. Now picture the night when everything stopped pretending. It wasn't a grand gala or a scripted moment. It was after the kind of argument that takes a piece out of you, or maybe after a stretch of distance where you try to convince yourself you're fine alone. The pressure had been building. Choices had been postponed, hearts had been guarded for too long. The room was quiet, not because there was nothing to say, but because the next words would cost something real. And then came the confession. Not a casual I love you tossed into the air to see where it lands. No. This one was carved out of vulnerability, built on brutal honesty, an all-in reveal of who they were beneath the posture and the public. What did it include? That's the part that keeps us leaning forward. Maybe it started with admitting to mistakes, the missed calls that weren't just forgetfulness, the silences that were fear in disguise. Maybe it was an apology that hurt to say and healed to hear. Or maybe, and this is the confession that hits the hardest, it was an admission of feelings they'd locked away to protect their careers, their reputations, their fragile sense of control. Because for a confession to be transformative, it has to touch the oldest wound and the deepest hope at once. For Barış and Elçin, it read like the story of Serkan and Caniozge, a script no one wrote, but everyone recognized. They put their cards down. No more armor. No more bluffing. Just the truth, steady and bare. And then came the moment that turned the current. The spark after the strike. We always talk about the confession, but sometimes the miracle is the answer to it. The moment could have been a glance that didn't flinch. A quiet yes disguised as a breath. A word chosen with care. It could have been the way Serkan, upon hearing Caniozge's voice and the truth, finally let his guard crumble and met love without hedging. Or perhaps it was Caniozge, seeing contrition settle true in Serkan's eyes, deciding to forgive not just him, but herself for holding back. With Barış and Elçin, you could feel the echo. Professional poise gave way to something softer. The performance disappeared. It was two people, not two images, facing each other without the safety net. This sort of breakthrough often arrives in stillness. After tears. After voices stretch thin. after both people say what they didn't want to admit and hear what they feared. Imagine their quiet place, a familiar room after an eventful day, maybe a sofa that remembers every late-night talk, a lamp that throws gentle light on worn-in truths. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. And then the tiny movement that feels like a miracle. A hand finding another at the exact second both decide not to retreat. An embrace that isn't dramatic, just sure. That is where it shifted, not on stage, not for cameras, but in the soft space where real things happen. If you ask me, the moment that changed everything was radical acceptance. Choosing to love the person as they are, not as a fantasy or a role. It was the instant they stopped fighting their own feelings, stopped rehearsing, stopped hedging, stopped protecting old fears, and allowed themselves to be seen. That decision carries weight. It says we know what hurt, and we know why it happened, and we choose to stand here anyway. It was the realization that their connection, tested by schedules and expectations, was still stronger than the noise around it. That is the heartbeat the fandom calls becoming Caniozge, not a label but a crossing, a step from almost to always. What were the clues? Maybe it was a word delivered with the exact intention it needed. Maybe the absence of evasion, no shifting eyes, no deflecting jokes, no performance, just two pairs of eyes holding that gaze. Maybe forgiveness announced itself quietly, in the way one moved closer without permission and the other didn't step back. The power of that instant comes from its simplicity. No fireworks, no grand gesture choreographed for applause. The things that reorder our lives rarely demand a stage, they ask for courage and a little privacy. And here's the part we don't talk about enough. A confession like that reshapes not only the relationship but how each person thinks of themselves. For Kay, it might have been the release of an old fear, the decision to stop being the version of himself the industry expected and to be the man Caniozge loved without calculation. For Caniozge, it might have been the moment she let faith return, trusting that tenderness can be sturdy, that a future can be real even when the past has disappointed you. For Barış and Elçin, this translated into new boundaries that protected what mattered and new courage to risk what they used to guard too tightly. The parallels to Sir Caniozge's final confession are undeniable, a narrative that felt like a myth until they lived it. We keep calling it a turning point, but listen closely, it wasn't just a single minute. It was a culmination. The long conversations that led nowhere until they suddenly did. The storms they weathered separately that taught them how to be brave together. The rehearsals that turned into reality. The whispers that became words. And then that one small act, a yes spoken without theatrics, became the cornerstone of the next chapter. The cameras can guess. The fans can speculate. But the truth is always quieter than the rumors and stronger than the doubts. Let me walk you through the rhythm of it as we felt it unfold. There was tension, and it wasn't the cute kind. There were withdrawals, hesitations, and the temptation to keep the peace by keeping distance. Then came the admission, I hurt you when I thought I was protecting myself. I pulled back because wanting you scared me. I pretended I didn't care because caring this much felt like a risk I couldn't afford. And then, the response, not a lecture, not a scorecard, just a brave return, I was scared too. I tried to outlast the feeling. It outlasted me. In that exchange, their story aligned with the legend of Serkan and Caniozge, the blueprint we've all studied. Real life caught up with the narrative everyone swore was only a dream. Picture their reaction afterward, no frenzy, no spectacle. Maybe tea went cold on a table while time did something strange. Maybe there was a bit of laughter, the kind that happens when the worst fears lift and leave the room lighter. Maybe there was quiet gratitude. You don't always know when you're crossing a threshold, sometimes you only feel the floor steady under your feet. That's the magic. That's the pivotal moment, the catalyst wrapped in calm. And for those wondering how this affects their world beyond that room, it changes everything subtly first, then obviously. Choices shift. Priorities realign. The way they show up, at work, with friends, for each other, acquires a new clarity. They stop acting like they're guessing. They start moving like they know. You can see it in the ease of a shared smile, in interviews where the answers feel warmer, in public appearances where body language tells its own quiet story. It's not for headlines, it's for the life they're actually living. We didn't get fireworks. We got something better, consistency after courage. And that is why this story stays with us. Because love, when it's honest, is both fierce and patient. It endures the complicated, heals the painful, and still chooses to be kind. When fans say Caniozge, they're really naming a pattern, two people brave enough to do the hardest thing, which is tell the truth and then live by it. When we say becoming Caniozge for Barış and Elçin, we mean that instant when honesty met acceptance and neither blinked. A quick rewind before we say goodbye. We explored the thread between their chemistry and their challenges. How timing, fear, and outside noise tested their bond. We pictured that final confession, the rawest kind, the one that asks for humility and offers freedom. We lingered in the stillness of the aftermath and watched the moment that changed everything reveal itself without spectacle. We traced how that revelation reached beyond romance, reshaping identity for Kay and restoring hope for Caniozge. We named the catalyst. That quiet pivotal moment when the heart says yes and the rest of you finally listens. We called it what it was, Caniozge-level courage, lived off-screen, real and unadorned. If you felt something in your chest while listening, you're not alone. These stories remind us that even the most admired people are human in all the important ways. They doubt. They delay. They protect themselves until the cost of protection is too high. And then, if they're lucky and brave, they confess. And if both are ready, they answer each other with the same grace. That is the lesson here, and that is the beauty. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think was the most vital part of that confession? Was it the apology, the naming of fear, or the declaration of love without conditions? And tell me, what was the moment that, for you, flipped the switch? Was it the look that didn't waver, the step closer, the way silence finally felt safe? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and I love how this community makes room for both swooning and sincerity. If this video moved you, if you found yourself breathing easier by the end, tap that like button. Share this with someone who believes in second chances and quiet miracles. And of course, if you haven't yet, subscribe to Secrets Behind the Stars and ring that bell so you're first in line for our next deep dive. Until then, hold tight to the stories that make you brave, and I'll see you in the next one.